It breaks down into your connection. Jamaican storytellers have a different perspective, and they have similar but different characters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick to African American from my community perspective. Okay. So from the African American perspective, you've been on tour with me a couple times, haven't you? Yeah. I have to ask because so many of my godchildren and children work with me. I don't always get it right. So from African American point of view, storytelling is re-emerging. It never really went away. When I was growing up, you had aunts and uncles and that odd person who was related to you but not related to you, who would come and they would just start telling stories, and a lot of it was, back in my day, we didn't have cars. You either walk or you took a horse. And if you got caught taking a horse that wasn't yours, well, that's another story. So the storytelling was also used to teach children how not to get in difficulty if they encountered white people who did not like black people. Okay, so the storytelling has always been there. But what's happening now is we have this re-emergence. We have the National Association of Black Storytellers. We have there's a storytelling organization that's based in Washington, D.C., whose name I temporarily forget, and I'm one of the co-founders, so please forgive me. We have RIBS. RIBS stands for Rhode Island Black Storytellers. So we have all these nice organizations kind of sort of coming together under a loose umbrella to share the storytelling, to share the rich history, and to demystify things. But I really think social media is one of the best things to happen to storytellers, because you can relate and talk to people from all around. Now for me, storytelling, I have to tell this real quick. John Rose says he ain't really quick. In 1976, I was down at the Folklight Festival, which is done by the Smithsonian Institute, which is an internationally famous series of museums. And I'm listening to the storyteller, and he's sitting on a little make-to shanty they put up. And I said, that guy sounds a lot like my Uncle Charles. It was my Uncle Charles. And he was the storyteller for the 1976 Bicentennial Folklight Festival on the National Mall. Flash forward to 2012, and I am the storyteller for the Folklight Festival of the Smithsonian Institute on the National Mall. Now, that's important because I discovered that I'm at least a third generation storyteller. All right? On my father's side of the family. So the storytelling, originally, I think, for most black families was to keep intact the history of the people, the history of your family, which would be very convoluted because if you escaped from slavery, the last thing you did was give your real name, give your assigned name to the new community you moved to. So a lot of us have relatives with different names because that's the way it evolved. Well, the storytelling was used to keep in the family connection. The storytelling also was used to keep in things like if you have a particular talent, if you're a great cook, or if you are a craftsman or something, to tell the story of how that came about, and also to hopefully lure you into doing that. For a moment, storytelling kind of fell into obscurity because it was looked at as being an entertainment technique, much the way of vaudeville, that was no longer needed. But unlike vaudeville, it's still needed. So there are groups, very dedicated, very persistent groups of people who tell stories that grow into organizations. And they can tell you stories. Some of them specialize. I know people who only do historical black women. And they get in, I guess we would call them almost reenactors, but they become that character. So they use that form of storytelling. There are those that use the storytelling to diffuse multicultural situations. There are people who use storytelling to teach. I think the best storytellers in the world are teachers, because teachers who know how to connect with their students are telling stories. Let me step back for a moment. Definition of a story. A story is a narrative of events that may or may not have happened. And one of the best examples I like to use is like at the end of the day when ladies get on the phone and they're talking to their friends about their day. Girl, let me tell you what happened today. You know that woman that I told you about that likes to get on my last nerve. Well, let me tell you, that's a story. If you get on and say, you know what, my husband just bought me, not my husband, but I'm talking about the ladies. My husband just bought me a dozen roses and the expensive chocolate that I told him not to buy me. Boy, I'm going to cook that man a dinner and dessert. That's a story. When John Rowe reaches out to me on the internet, on the internet and brings me up to date on what's going on, that's a story. When you guys go back, in fact, before you go back, but when you guys go back and relate the events of this festival, you're telling stories. So, storytelling in America, particularly in Black America, is re-emerging with a vengeance, with an energy. And it is used to teach, you name it. If you can tell a story about it and you engage students in it, then you have told truly a magnificent story. Now, I can't speak too much for the non-African American storytellers. A lot of them have talent, and a lot of them, their delivery and their techniques are different. I'm going to sum this up by saying my first experience talking to an all-white audience, I was in my 20s, back in 1960, and I was on tour in the Midwest. Oklahoma in the Midwest? Okay. I was on tour in the Midwest, and I was one of two directors for an organization called the Nubian Theater Company. And they took us to places outside of Tulsa, around Tulsa, in Tulsa, and they would drop us off and come back and pick us up. Well, one day they took me and they kept driving. I'm like, do I need to open this door and tuck and roll? I mean, it was going way out. So they finally pulled up to this place, and I had my drum. And usually the driver waits for me to establish that I'm there, with the people running the program. So he said, I'll be back in an hour. He was gone. Oh, no. So I go inside and I said, I'm Baba C. I'm going to schedule to tell stories to your participant. Are you sure? Yes. I don't have you down on the program. And then, he's Baba C. Oh, okay, well, we're not ready for you. Why don't you go and sit under that tree in the shade and we'll get ready for you. Now, he's telling me to sit under a tree, a big old tree. I've been having nightmares. There's a song called Strange Fruit, sung by Billie Holiday. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that song, she was talking about going through the South and racism. And the strange fruit hanging from the tree were black men, nooses around their neck, and they would leave them there to rot. And I don't want to get too graphic. But so I'm having nightmares of strange fruit, and they tell me to go sit under a freaking tree! It's a big old tree, big branches, to hold me. So I'm like, okay. There used to be a commercial in the United States that they had to pull off, and it would show a migrant worker, and it would talk about deodorant. So if it works for him, it'll work for you. Yeah, so many problems with that. They had to take it off. All right, so I'm sitting under this tree. I take out my drum, and I'm, doing that, and going over what I think I might be doing, and I'm sitting, boom, and I look up, and I'm surrounded by white people. Now, I'm from Washington, D.C. That doesn't happen often. And they're different ages, and they're all looking at me. I'm like, okay. So I start doing my stories. Now, I'm used to performing mostly for African American and Pan-African audiences, right? So I'm doing it, and I'm hitting a joke, and I'm waiting for the laugh, nothing. And so I'm doing it, and I'm waiting for the applause, nothing. I'm doing call and response, and I'm not getting the response. And I'm like, I know I'm doing this right. I know I'm doing this right. I'm playing the drum, hit that final note, nothing. And I'm doing it well. And I'm back. And I'm doing it, and I finally do it, and take my bow, I get a standing ovation. Difference in cultural perceptions and learnings. They had been told, don't embarrass us, don't speak out of turn, don't have any conversations, and don't say anything until the man's finished. But that's the difference, that's the difference in the audience. It's also the difference in a lot of the presentations by non-African American storytellers. The techniques are wonderful, but that's one of the differences. So, John Rowe, to sum it up, storytelling in America, particularly with the African American and Pan-African communities, plural, it's revived, it's very intense. There are pockets where it's like everybody knows your name. There are organizations that have realized that they're not in competition with each other and they work together. And I would say that, and he actually did I'm old film. He actually did a film on me about 6-8 years ago.
Sure.
Okay. And we're dealing with a group of people who are dealing with Kwanzaa. And I'm there to explain Kwanzaa to the non-Kwanzaa audience, right? So the storytelling is still there, it's alive. And it's used to teach cultural things. You want to say that?
I do, but please continue.
No, go ahead. Okay. So it's used, and if I'm being redundant, I'm being redundant. It's used to teach cultural things. It's used to help children understand that if your name is Aziz, if your name is Amdullah, if your name is Chikere Kukumba, there's nothing wrong with having that name. And it's used to teach pride and acceptance and being perceived as being culturally different. So, and it's also used to teach how to enjoy good food. You know. In fact, there's a famous cookbook by I don't remember Copeland's first name, but his name is Copeland, and he has this marvelous cookbook out that has stories in it behind the recipes and also behind things of when he was growing up. So storytelling is alive and well in America. You may not see it on the traditional media at large, but it's very vibrant and it's very alive.
Thanks. Excellent point. To your point, I wanted to add, the question was about traditional storytelling in the African American community, or at least in our state communities, right?
Well, it's about storytelling in general.
Sure. Well, to that point, I would say that we would be remiss if we didn't mention how storytelling has evolved in the form of music, especially the African American community.
Let Mark speak. I'll just shut you up.
I'm agreeing, yes.
Your boy.
He's going to absolutely fill in to the points that I can't complete. But essentially, like, if we talk about storytelling and its origins of how it came across, the Atlantic Ocean from Africa into slave communities where people were not allowed to sort of teach, and instead they told stories through music with drums, it evolved into the 1950s where it became spoken word and poetry, and then up into its modern incarnation in the form of rap and hip hop. So I would say that while it hasn't, the traditional form is definitely re-emerging, it still has maintained its roots through music, through the blues, through poetry, through spoken word, in a similar manner.
Because the blues, if you really know the blues, you know the blues is not about sad times and bad times. It's about how you survive those times. My baby done left me, and the dog ran away with her, But you talk about how you're still getting ahead, how you're still alive, how you're still enjoying the life. The blues is an excellent example of traditional African storytelling. So when I talk about certain art forms, I'm talking about before they got co-opted. So the blues, jazz is mostly music, but jazz is about it's about the rhythm, it's about that connectivity that it doesn't matter whether you're from Louisiana or Rhode Island or Texas or Alaska, it's about that connectivity, it's about that energy. And, jazz and swing, and there's another one I've left out. But with the gospel. When gospel music first started out, there were preachers and ministers that said, we don't want that trash in here, but it's infectious. And gospel music, and what we now call inspirational music, because it ain't all gospel, it communicates, it reaches. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Music, stories unite the souls. So yes, you're right. I left a lot of that out because I was trying not to talk forever. I felt that. Anyhow, but jazz, hip hop, even the original rock and roll that grew out of people like he was very flamboyant.
Little Richard.
Little Richard, thank you. See, you said Elvis Presley, and I almost got on my eye. Little Richard, when he sang Tutti Frutti, and it was covered by somebody else.
That was the record companies put Pat Boone on it.
Yes.
And Tutti Frutti by Pat Boone.
Right.
I ain't got no song at all.
None. It could have been Tutti Frutti, I'm taking a nap. Tutti Frutti. But when
Little
Richard sang it, it made you want to get up, So yes, that's part of the storytelling. Music and playing the drums. In fact, some of the songs that we sing, Steal away. My voice is off today. Ain't got time to stay here. They were talking about Ezekiel saw a wheel, way in the middle of the wheel. The big wheel run by faith and the little wheel by the grace of God. Ezekiel saw a wheel, way in the middle of the air. They were talking about following the drinking gourd. See, and you're not telling anyone who was getting ready to escape knew what you were talking about. You could tell stories, but you can't tell everybody everything. So you tell stories so those who don't know won't know, and those who do know will know. So, and that's a great big tradition in African American storytelling.
It's like capoeira. Capoeira was a form to teach people like martial arts, but without other people knowing, the slave masters from knowing. So in the same way, music was a way to communicate through a form of stories.
Yeah. So, if I'm gonna try to wrap this up, the traditional storytelling. See, when you say traditional, you go back to the roots and understand that the roots are there, with the branches and the trunks. Some trees are so old they have more than one trunk, and so the trunks and the branches and the trees are still there, but they may look different than the original seed, the original plant. And I think that's the state of storytelling in the African American community, or Pan-African community. If I say African American, I really mean Pan-African community. There's some places where when they tell the stories, and storytelling is used to if you did something, Mark will use your name. So Mark did something he wasn't supposed to do, and he comes to dinner, and Uncle Baba C is at dinner, and Aunt Matilda's at the table, and she says, I was reminded of a story about this rabbit named Spark. And Spark, and she told about what Spark did that was wrong and what he needs to get it done right. And Mark might go, "You talking about me? You talking about me?" She said, "Honey, did I say your name?" "No, ma'am." "Then I couldn't possibly be talking about you, could I?" But if it's a lesson here for you to learn, I hope you learn it. And as long as you didn't say, "God bless your heart," you were okay. By the way, if any of you are ever in the South, and you get into a discussion with people who don't agree with you, and they say, "God bless your heart," that is not a compliment. Just be quiet or leave the room.
Whoa! Sorry.
See, if someone would say, "God bless her heart."
You trying to upstage you.
See. So, in summary, it's still growing, it's still evolving. We have spoken word now. And the difference between poetry and spoken word, I'm going to ask you, did anyone know the difference between poetry and spoken word? I'll tell you the answer. People will pay for spoken word.
People are embarrassed, and this has happened throughout the whole, and you know this, throughout the whole modern history of performance poetry.
Yes.
Is people are embarrassed about using the word poetry, and it needs to stand up and shout its name.
Yes.
And not be embarrassed to say, I mean, I've been doing performance poetry since the 70s.
So,
and I said you would know that.
Yes. I was part of the Renaissance of poetry in the 70s in Washington, D.C. I ticked off somebody because we did these arrangements with artists and poets, and you had 5, maybe 7 minutes, 10 at the max. But this particular poet used to think it was her show, and she would take up 15 to 20 minutes. And so I started instructing her that. She has 5 minutes. 5 minutes and 10 seconds, lights come down, mic goes off. She knew I was doing. She wrote 2 definitive books on the poetry renaissance in Washington, D.C. Everybody and their uncle was named except for me.
Really?
Yes.
So you will know, look, we never changed doing what we did.
No,
but we were called performance poets, cabaret poets.
Yes.
This poet, that poet, nothing, just poets.
Yes.
And
so what some of the venues do now is they call it either poetry and spoken word or spoken word and poetry. So they're bringing back the legitimacy and not being. Oh, by the way, I encourage everyone to look up Paul Laurence Dunbar, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale
Hurston.
Thank you. Say it again.
Zora Neale Hurston.
Right. And there's this other young poet. Well, he used to be young, Baba C. And but look those folk up and look up their contemporaries. In fact, study the Harlem Renaissance, because that tells you a lot about the rich history and tradition of storytelling and art. Oh, one last thing, if I may.
Yeah, I'm going to come in after you.
Okay.
No,
Back in the late 70s, early 80s, I had been, my theater company had been commissioned by the Corcoran Art Gallery. The Corcoran Art Gallery is now, I think, owned by the Smithsonian. They went under. But the Corcoran Art Gallery, Corcoran Art Gallery, Corcoran, thank you, they say Corcoran. The Corcoran Art Gallery was a big deal. And they were having this exhibit on native artists. I think that's what they called it.
Indigenous.
And what they were doing is they were taking the artwork from professionally untrained, self-taught artists from different regions in the South. And I mean, it was a wonderful exhibit, but they wanted to have an oral component to go along with it. And so they hired us, and I was trying to rotate to make sure everyone in the company got a chance to do at least one program. Now this is about, I'm just telling this story to address the power of storytelling. So we get in this group, it's a private school, and there's only one black kid in the group. And I'm dressed up as Uncle Josh. In my early years, I used to play a character as old as I am now. And it used to take 30 minutes to an hour to do the makeup, the powder, and the wigs. And then I stopped doing it because it took 30 minutes to an hour not to look that old. But anyhow, so Josh is telling the story, and a lot of times he would talk in dialect. And so this boy is sitting out in the audience, and he's looking embarrassed and uneasy because he's the only black child there, and here's this old man up there talking in dialect. So I'm doing the stories, and I go into gear, and I bring him up to do a story with me. He's a little bit shy. I get him going, I bring up some of his friends, and I finish the storytelling. They get a round of applause, and I see him go from the power of storytelling. I was at the museum for the whole day, and I got word back for 2 weeks. He was a celebrity at his school, and I heard a kid say, "I didn't know your culture had that. I didn't know your culture was so rich and diverse. I didn't." And I called him aside. I told him some names and things he could look up on his own. But he went from being embarrassed, quiet, and shy to claiming his own. That's the power of storytelling, especially in the African American community. And I've left out so much.
but, well,
Y'all can do that.
can I just mention a little about the Harlem Renaissance?
Yes.
And its connection to North Africa and Senegal and places, because the popular conception, and this is America. The popular conception is that America invented everything.
Yes.
And in fact, the first
We did invent everything.
Yeah, we know. But the first Black Studies department in the Northern Hemisphere was in the Sorbonne. It was well before the picked up.
Right.
The reason for that was the negritude movement that came out of North Africa.
Say that word again.
Negritude.
And the reason why I had you say it again is a colleague and I, she got her degrees in something. She got into an argument. I said, no, it's called negritude. No, it wasn't. I said, yes, it was called negritude, and it was to address what we now call Pan-Africanism. A month later, she called and said, oh, you were right. Negritude.
So that movement came, and one of the without going on historically too long, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm telling people about their own stuff, is that in the French colonies, there was no bar to how far you could go as an African, providing you stopped being an African.
Right.
Providing you got rid of your culture.
And they still do that.
And so there was, this was what, so in sort of as colonisation disappeared, there was, and one of the great things that people are not the middle class, but what happens when there's a middle class and students is people say, actually, I want a bit of my own culture back.
Thank you.
And so that's phenomenal. I mean, I've found him wasn't from Algeria, but he spent a lot of time in Algeria, and the Senegalese poets and things, and they inspired the people, the Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou, and all those people. So, sorry, I just cut
you're spot on. And sometimes it's good to hear something from a different set of mouths. So you're spot on. The only thing I would add, if I haven't forgotten already, and I did, but I'll add it on when you finish,
I'm finished. I just wanted
But you're right.
to give credit to the North African contemporary African influence to America, so America doesn't claim it all.
But part of the early reason why African American, we weren't African Americans back then, but I'm not going to use the name they had for us. I refused to be a Negro and I refused to be colored. All right, and what they did with color is start out with uppercase and then became lowercase. When it's uppercase, it's a proper noun. When it's lowercase, it's just a descriptive adjective. All right. Then we were Negroes. It was uppercase. Then it became lowercase. When it was uppercase, it was a proper noun. It represented a people, a culture. When it became lowercase, it was an adjective. I got that right? Adjective, not adverb. So they did the same thing with black, and I've gotten into many discussions with English teachers about this. When it's uppercase, it's a proper noun. It designates a culture, a heritage, a people. When it's lowercase, it's a color. And I find it very confusing to talk about, you know, that light-skinned black guy. You know the light-skinned black guy. You know he's light-skinned. He's a light-skinned black guy. What? You know? Oh yeah, he's a red-bone black. So I do African American, and then the complaint is, why are you hyphenating your name? You're all American. I said, we're all American, we wouldn't be having this discussion. You know. So a lot of times in our community, we claimed it as our own because although we were claiming being proud of our blackness, we weren't ready yet to claim and embrace our Africanness. And that came later. And that's also the power of storytelling, because storytelling, whether you're black or white, if you want to talk about the oldest storytellers, it goes back to Africa. So storytelling is a very powerful way of not only reclaiming your own, but establishing and being proud of your own, and accepting the good, the bad, and the not so, stuff about your heritage. But storytelling can be that spark that makes a difference in someone's life. And I've literally seen it change a person's decision from going to prison to going to college. Go ahead, John Rowe.
Well, I want to move on at this point, so thank you, Brother Sid.
Thank you, and thank you, Jamal.
Is my Senegalese brother still up here?
No. He'll be back.
Yeah, it would have been great to move on from Babassi to Senegal, but we'll go to North Africa. What is the state of tell us about the state of storytelling in Morocco at the moment?
Storytelling in Morocco is for life. You are explaining the life, and you can write story, because the life is story. For example, I have a problem, but I can do with that. Yes, you understand me.
Mm-hmm.
But you can do it that I can change the problem for do it. Mm-hmm. I can write this because the another person you can write you can read the story. He is story for me, but he read the story. You can who
Yeah, and it makes total sense. It's a bit like Babassi was saying, without using the name, when you use the rabbit thing, and in fact, he was giving Marcus slap. There was a
No,
but I think he was just saying, Mark, you just pulling him back a little, and
he's
so,
good at pulling me back.
Yeah, but that's more. But it's also more personal, as you were saying, that where you're looking at yourself and you're thinking, oh, how am I going to deal with this? And you read a story about somewhere else where it's got a parallel where you can relate to that problem. Yeah. And so it's those traditional stories and it could have been something, a character that was thousands of years ago. You think, oh, that's what I'm dealing with now.
Right.
And of course. There's this phenomenal resurgence it never went away, but there's this phenomenal resurgence of storytelling in Morocco at the moment.
You know what storytelling's like? When they say overnight sensation. It took 10 years. but you're an overnight sensation, overnight success. 10 years, they don't talk about that. And the storytelling is being it's re-emerging. It's people becoming re-aware of it. But they act like it's this new thing. No, but that's all right. If you want to talk about it, it's a new thing and give me some coverage, talk about that and I'll correct you during the coverage, you know? So, what I find ironic is that I'm an oral historian about to write a book on oral history. You know, but I think a lot of us in that situation.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm an oral historian, I'm an oral storyteller, but I gotta put it down in a book to make sure that it survives for people beyond my immediate reach. By the way, thank you. You two have been very kind and very generous today.
Yeah.
You're walking and engaging me in conversation. I know y'all making sure the old man made it, but it's okay.
So let us move to, and I know you claim you know nothing about storytelling, but you and then you just did the most phenomenal traditional story.
Yeah.
So could you say a little about stories in Senegal?
In Senegal. Well, before I start, sorry for my English. In Senegal, bon, I can say that yesterday is my first time to practice storytelling in public. Why I say in public? Because in the Senegalese or maybe the African or the traditional African orals, we have something. It's the storytelling. The storytelling is in our blood. The storytelling is in our blood. Why I said it? When you are a kid, after the dinner, you listen a story before you go to bed. And how you do it? It's not that we are at the house, and how I can say it, in the core of the house, and you have all the children, maybe you are 4, 5, depending on the family, and the mother come to tell you a story. It's your mother come to tell you a story. And the mother come to tell you a story, the story which relate your own story in your family, where you come from. Or when you watch your grandfather did. You say? And they make a story in this, how I can say it, in the context or who you are. Because the story have to mean something for the children. And to educate children in what they are, where they come from, we did it by the storytelling. And the children too, when they are together in the car of the house, and the parents maybe they are in the other side, the children between us tell a story. And every children tell a story. Every child tell a story. But what kind of story? That's not the same story related by parents. The story of jokes. In Senegal we have it. Every Senegalese man have a many story, but the story of joke in his mind.
Yes.
And the specificity is not in his mind, but they can create it. For example, the story I read yesterday is not the story I have prepared it or no. We have a message. The message yesterday is Mandu, own your business. Put your hand on your own business. In Senegal we say Mandu. But when I have Mandu in my mind, I have to create a story about Mandu. So that's why the story I told yesterday was created on stage. Because the storytelling is on us. The storytelling is in our blood. That's how storytelling, how I can say, is in Senegal. So we don't have a stage of storytelling or everything. No. This is in every family, every each group, there is storytelling. After the dinner, we have a story telling forward for joke, and everybody has his own story. And everybody can create his own story. And it's amazing thing.
Will you two agree with me
Yeah.
that our storytelling is based on our ancestors? That our storytelling is an expression of what we have a saying, we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. So our storytelling comes from our ancestors. You understand? It comes from our heart, our spirit.
Yeah.
So our storytelling, even though it may change and evolve, it is still is here, and it's here. When I do this, is that your soul, your aura is slightly outside your body. So your spirit and your heart are yes. So our storytelling, even when we are telling it just to have fun, it's never just to have fun. It's the story based on the gift given to us by our ancestors. Would you agree with that?
That's true. I'm agree with you.
Très bien.
So that's why in Senegal we don't have, how I can say, we don't have a professional storytelling area, but every Senegalese man is a storyteller.
But I've met griots or storytellers from Senegalese who play the talking drum.
Yeah.
No, the talking drum.
Talking drums.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I had a friend that could actually make he could actually make the drum say your name. And a woman said, oh, he can't make it say my name. And someone said, what's your name? She said, Nancy. He made it go, Nancy. I'm like, wow, man. So yeah, I just say that because there is some organized storytelling out of the country, you know. But you know what? I'm from America. I don't know everything that's American, you know. And you don't have the responsibility or task of knowing everything Senegalese.
Yeah.
But I just want to say some of the most fascinating storytellers I've met were from Senegal.
Yeah.
So I just want to share that.
And what I want to say something else is we have different type of storytelling.
Yes.
There is some guys who do it with, some men do it with instrumental music,
Right.
the kora,
the
or
drums.
the balafon,
Yes.
or the drums, but every instrumental have a significant things. That's the main thing.
Thank
And
you.
it's so deep. So and sorry because my English is not.
No,
good.
you're
Oh no.
You have conveyed.
Too deep,
Stop
but
apologizing.
You have conveyed.
Your English is better than my everything else. Okay?